Hi, I'm Mike Maloney, and welcome to another CSRM podcast. Today's episode is hosted by Dr. Greg Linville.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another CSRM podcast. And we are recording this. And so hopefully technology works for us, not against us, but that makes this all the more fun. So I am joined today with Dr. Greg Linville and also Scott Stedman, our new Director of Digital Resources. If you caught our previous podcast here in the past few weeks, you've learned about Scott and his recent hire. And Scott, why don't you say hello and just a quick recap as to who you are and your role with CSRM before we dive into today's topic.
Yes, my name is Scott Stedman. I'm what Dan said, I'm the Director of Digital Resources, and my role here at CSRM is to edit these podcasts, work on other media projects that we have going with CSRM, and also kind of do some preservation for a lot of our content and just kind of keeping everything up to date and making sure we have records of everything. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, welcome again, Scott. We're glad to have you. And we just encourage you, check out our website. You can read more about our staff. And of course, for a new staff member, if the Lord puts it on your heart to help donate towards his fundraising efforts, we would absolutely love for you to partner with Scott in that way. Scott just lobbed me a softball, and Dr. Linville as well, because when we talk about resources, one of the things that we've been doing for years is publishing books. And so, Greg, why don't you talk to us a little bit about all the books we have, the series, kind of where we've been, and the book that we're going to review today, which is Putting Church Back in the Game. So tell us about that.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's great to be with both you and Scott. And Scott, we're glad you're on board with us. You're doing a great job. And so thanks for all you do. We started a number of years ago. It's hard for me to exactly remember, Dan, but probably about 10 years ago, the CSRM board said, we probably need to put all of our thoughts down so that we can pass this on, and as we train and we get systematic about it. And even to the point of understanding that we needed to create a language so that when everybody was using a particular term or word, that they meant the same thing. So like today, we're talking about putting the church back in a game. What do we mean about church? When we say church, what does that mean? When we say salvation, what does that mean? On and on. And so we believed then that we needed to do this from what we had come to as an organization, as a mission, in the ologies. It's take theology and go to the latter part of that. And what are the sports outreach, the sports rec and fitness outreach ologies? And that comes out of what we call our 3-tier paradigm, which I'm thinking if you're watching this might even come up on the screen so you can get a sense of what this whole thing is. Level 1, theological truths. These are Christocentric theological truths. These are the things that give us the why we do what we do. It's what do we believe? How do we think? How do we envision our ministry? It's all of that kind of thing. And then out of that emerges the second tier, which is our philosophical principles. Now, these are biblically based philosophical principles. If the level 1 gives us the why, the level 2 gives us the when, the where, with whom. It doesn't yet give us the what. It just is the organizational structure from which these theological truths come into being. And then out of that level 2 comes the level 3, which is the methodological models. Now, these models, we believe, need to be strategic, relevant, efficient, and effective. Ultimately, if it's not effective, then why are we doing any of this? So that is what this then book series is based on, is that three-tier paradigm. And we talked about this the last time we had an interview about one of our books in the series. And we'd recommend that you go back and watch that video series that's part of our podcast series, but also read the book. And that's a Sports Outreach Fundamentals book that'll explain the three-tier paradigm to you a little bit more. So we're not going to go into that any more than to say that this book, Putting the Church Back in a Game, was the first of 4 theological, these are the ologies, the first of 4 sports outreach ologies, and it has to do with ecclesiology. So that's where we are up to this point, Dan.
Well, and I think you've done a great job giving us that overview. Let's start to drill down some. First, tell us why this title, Putting the Church Back in the Game. I think that kind of sets up my follow-up question is drill down deep into those ologies that you just mentioned. So tell us about the title, and then let's get to those ologies.
Well, what's happened with a lot of our congregational-based sports rec and fitness is that we sometimes don't do the sport part of this well, or the fitness part of this well. And I don't want to be mean-spirited in any way, but we kind of just roll a ball out, have some fun. And as much as I greatly love and participate, in fact, the church that I'm invested in is doing this week in a vacation Bible school. As much as I love that, it's sometimes our sports are vacation Bible school with a ball, rather than being a sports league with a Bible. And so sometimes the church in general, the worldwide church, represented through its congregations, the individual bodies around the world, they don't do the sport well. They don't do the fitness well. They don't, whatever it is, it's the more technical, physical part of it. They don't do it well. And so the title is trying to help us say the church needs to get back in this game and do sport well, do recreation well, do fitness well. So that's part of the title, Dan.
Great. And I think that the people watching this understand the value of sport rec and fitness and wanting to improve upon those things, make them better, make them most effective. And a great way to begin is exactly going back to that 3-tier paradigm, is to start with the theology. And so what this book begins to do is it starts to dive into those ologies. So Greg, why don't you break down the ologies that are covered in this book and then the upcoming books as well, and why those are something that should be foundational for any sports rec and fitness minister.
It's a great insight, Dan. And again, if we can't start with what we believe and what we think, we don't know how to envision what we actually end up doing. So we started with this one, with ecclesiology. And I want to be careful how I say this, because it can be maybe offensive to many of our brothers and sisters. It may have more to say to the sports related para-ministry world. Mm-hmm. But even in that phrase, we change it a little bit. We don't call it para-church, because para means outside of and beside. We believe that those that are doing these ministries, and most of them have an A in their name, athletes, and you can go with all kinds of athletes. You know what I'm talking about, with a lot of our brothers and sisters that are in these outreaches and missions, that they may have as much to gain from this particular book as anybody, because they are in the church. They're not outside of the church. Therefore, they can't be para-church, but they can be a ministry that's beside the church. And they have some great functions, and they have some great goals. And yet, if they don't have a solid ecclesiology, meaning a theology of what the Church of Jesus Christ is about, then they're not going to know how to accomplish their ultimate goals, which should be, and I think they would agree to this, is in the Great Commission, go and make disciples. And so a disciple is somebody who ultimately gets involved in a local church. Getting into a church doesn't get you into heaven, doesn't get you saved. We all know that. That's not what we're saying. But full maturity in Christ, becoming a dedicated disciple, this is what's really important. It's also important, however, for the local church person, not just the paraministry world, because I've talked to a lot of these sports and rec ministers, and they say, come on, give me something I really need. You're talking to me about ecclesiology? I mean, for crying out loud, this is what I do. I work for a church. Yeah, but do you really understand church? And so in these ologies, we felt it important to start with a clear definition of the church. And so when we say the church, both are capitalized, we would say that that's the universal church. And we often use local church or congregation or a local assembly, some other ways to define the congregational part of that. And then out of that, we flow into soteriology, which is the fourth book. And that has to do with what does it mean to be saved? What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? And then the third one is missiology. So how do we actually go about the mission of reaching those who are far from Jesus in the church? And then the one we never thought that we would have to write about is the Christology, the Christ of sports, rec, and fitness outreach. And why do we do that? Well, for two reasons. One, that it's sad to say that there are whole denominations now that have said evangelism isn't important because all roads lead to heaven. It doesn't matter what religion you're part of. And many people within the Christian church they don't think this is important. So yeah, Christ is the center of it all, the foundation of it all. And then there's also places in the world where Christ is very offensive, whether that be in communist countries or countries that are predominated by another religious tradition. And how can we, in a very sensitive way, but also a very effective way, share Christ? And so Christology is the fourth then of the ologies, of the sports outreach ologies. And the first three are all in print. And the fourth one is being written as we speak. And then we've also had some books that go on beyond that talk about the philosophy, like book 2 that we did last time in this podcast. And then the ones that are coming in the future about, okay, what do we do? What's our methodology? And we've got one of those in print right now, and that's Sports Ministry for the World, the ministry of the shoe, life of the shoe. So I don't know, Dan, did I answer your question? I got long-winded.
No, it was good. I think that's a great overview of what from here on out, these books that have been published and yet to be published are covering. And it's just laying that foundation of some very important theological concepts that we have to really figure out. And I love that we start with the church, and especially when it comes to what we're coming out of with COVID and all that. I think we all asked that question when we couldn't gather together, whether for worship or worship on a basketball court. We really, I think, all wrestled through, well, since we can't be together physically, well, what is the church? And I think we all said for a long time, well, the church isn't a building. The church isn't necessarily just a sports league. The church is the people. And so I think we found ways to continue on with the healthy expression of church. And I think this is a great place for us to start. I did have a quick question for you. When we think about ologies, are there any ideas in the future about eschatology for you? Any writings coming up here soon? And that it's not controversial at all to write about that, right, Greg?
Yeah, like will there be sport in heaven? And will I be able to slam dunk in heaven? Yeah, yeah. We have actually talked about that, Dan, and we felt like that may come in the future, but that we've got a few things that may be a little more pragmatically helpful to us right now.
Yes.
But there is one part of that that is pragmatic no matter what, and it's a reminder. The eschatology reminds us that Jesus is coming back, or to very soon, or to very least, that we end our life. And so there's an urgency to get the gospel out to people before they pass into eternity or before Jesus comes back. So that's a crucial part of that. So we have thought about it. It's not right on the front line there, though.
Well, I love that you had an answer for that. And you're absolutely right. We should all feel this sense of urgency, which is why a lot of us have gotten into sports rec and fitness ministry, because we know it's a great way to make more and better disciples of Jesus. Right. And so we're kind of wrapping up this first section here, this first segment. And I want to remind you that these resources can be found on our website at csrm.org. We have our own publishing house called Overwhelming Victory Press, and you can order these books right there at our website, csrm.org. Just go to our online store, and we just encourage you use these resources with those in your network and your continued professional development. Give these resources, if you're a sports minister, give it to your senior pastor,
yes,
your elders, so they know what you are doing, how you are furthering your professional education, and even your spiritual development as you kind of contemplate where you are with all these things. So, Greg, we kind of have introduced the preface and even a little bit of the overview of chapter 1. Any parting words before we really dive into the second section in our next podcast about this book and why people should check it out?
Yeah, and I'd also like to maybe preface where we're going with a short story, and that is the couple, the man that wrote the foreword for this book is Andre Thornton. And Andre, over about a 6 or 7 year period in the major leagues, had the best power numbers, meaning home runs, RBI, slugging percentage, of anybody in the major leagues. And I was involved in sports chaplaincy still am to some degree, for decades. And Andre was just absolutely top of the heap of all the people that I ever came across. And I mentioned him not only to thank him for his words here in this book that he wrote for us, but also because he is a shining example. He is the model, because he has been so involved personally in the local church all through his playing days, all through his life, has been an elder in the church, is a teacher within the church. And this, to me, is the absolute model for who Christian athletes should be and what they should be doing. And so that gives us the segue into what we're going to be going into, because some of the models that we've had when it comes into thinking about the church hasn't at all integrated those athletes into the local church. And a lot of the models that are out there for sports outreach have really kind of left us a little short. So as you said, the first couple chapters are reviews of the past couple books, and we really started getting into the meat into it in the third chapter. And we're going to start talking about these kind of rationales of why having a theology of the church is so important to the whole idea of sports rec and fitness outreach. That's where we're going, Dan.
Well, I love that you mentioned Andre Thornton, and absolutely, that's a great model. As a former Cleveland Indian, now Cleveland Guardians, I remember watching him as a kid growing up, and to know that someone with that platform is a major advocate for the ministry that we are all about, which is taking this sports rec and fitness to the local church. what an amazing platform for
Right.
where we're going to go here throughout the rest of our study on this book.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for this first session here. And we just encourage you to continue on in the upcoming weeks as we dive through the rest of this book, and we kind of break down the theology of the local church and why it matters for sports, rec, and fitness as we continue to evaluate putting the church back in the game. Thank you so much for your time here today. We look forward to seeing you next time.
The CSRM podcast is a production of CSRM and their production house, Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Craig Linville is the executive producer, and Scott Stedman is the associate producer and editor. To learn more about CSRM, visit csrm.org. For more information about Overwhelming Victory, visit overwhelmingvictory.org. The CSRM podcast is the flagship member of the podcast network Overwhelming Victory Radio. For more information on Overwhelming Victory Radio, or to listen to our partner podcasts, visit overwhelmingvictory.org/OV Radio. For CSRM Podcasts, I'm Mike Maloney. Have a blessed day.